Hi everyone, the partial prophet here. Thanks for tuning in. So I wanted to remind you that we know in part and we prophesy in part, and then when Jesus comes, we will see fully. So I also wanted to make the comment that today we might not really be able to find out what's going on with the quote unquote protests and looting because we know that the news is biased. And so, and then what's kind of interesting too is that we sort of have like groups of people that like to kind of operate in conspiracy theories. And so I kind of think we have like conspiracy theories on the left and conspiracy theories on the right. And the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. And so that's another thing we need to be aware of, that when Jesus comes, he's gonna like help us see more fully about our times. So today I want to talk about Trump's Hanukkah, 8 Nights of Decreasing Light. So we've had, the riots have been going on. They actually said tonight's the ninth night of the riots in America. And so I don't know if Hanukkah could be a good picture of what's happening with the riots. But it's interesting because the rabbis, there's kind of this debate about Hanukkah, and like one of the rabbis, I mean, this happened a while ago, and so it's kind of a tradition in the Jewish faith. But one of the earlier rabbis like talked about decreasing light on Hanukkah, and then another rabbi talked about increasing light. And I think what's possible is that with Trump being the false Messiah that comes before the true Messiah, is that what we could have is his Hanukkah, which would definitely be decreasing light, and then when the Messiah comes, then he will bring light back to the world. And so I think that could be a possibility of what could happen. And the other thing too, I just wanted to point this out one more time too, is that Trump would be kind of like John the Baptist figure. And you know how John the Baptist says in the Gospels, he says, I must decrease, that he must increase and I must decrease. So we see kind of that concept of increasing and decreasing with the person of John. But Trump, there's some things in the story with John the Baptist that I think connect to Trump. Not all of it, because like John the Baptist was definitely a lot more righteous person than Trump is. But I think there's some prophetic shadows in his story that connect to Trump. And then the biggest thing is just basically when the Messiah, when Jesus came, then people stopped following. Some of John's followers left following John and then started following Jesus. And so I think we're going to see a repeat of that some of the people now that are following Trump, almost like he's a messianic figure, are going to switch over to Jesus when they see the true Jesus, the true Messiah. Okay, so then I wanted to talk about in the Book of Esther. So I'm going to try to go through this fast so I don't weigh you down with details, which is really hard for me because I'm a very detailed person. But I just wanted to show you how we are fulfilling prophecy. One of the books of the Bible that I'm going to focus on is the Book of Esther. But it is all over the Bible. We are fulfilling prophecy all over the place in these days. So just really quickly, in the first chapter of Esther, and I won't even read it. I'll let you go read the Book of Esther. But in the first chapter of Esther, it talks about the king giving a banquet for 180 days. And so I want to propose that that is Trump's deal of the century, because 180 days can be parsed out to be 666. 6 times 3 is 18. And it talks about this banquet happening in the third year of his reign. So we saw Trump's deal of the century was just soon after his third year, after becoming president. And then let's see, and then so it says he gave a banquet for all his princes and attendants, the army officers in Persia and Media. And so it's kind of listing the male characters, in the king, that the banquet, it was for the princes. It doesn't say princesses, it says princes. And so that would be a connection to the Jewish people. And it says, and the princes of his provinces being in his presence. Okay, so that is the deal of the century. And then it says, when these days were completed, the king gave a banquet lasting 7 days. Okay, so what happened is, because of Trump's deal of the century, we were put in a type of the Feast of Booths, which is a 7-day feast. And so with the coronavirus, we were put in shutdown, which was the Feast of Booths is a prophetic shadow of us being in isolation for the coronavirus. Okay. And I mean, obviously it was longer than 7 days, but 7 is kind of that number of completion. So we were isolated for as long as, God wanted us to be isolated, which I think actually worked out to be 40 days. And then, because it's interesting, because this banquet in Esther 1, it talks about how drinks were served in golden vessels of various kinds, and the royal wine was plentiful, according to the king's bounty. Okay, so think of the king here as being God. And so it's his wine, okay? And we learn in Revelation that wine is the wrath of God, is a picture of the wrath of God, because it says, if anyone worships the beast in his image and receives a mark on his forehead or on his hand, he will also drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is mixed in full strength in the cup of his anger. Okay. So we see wine being a picture of God's wrath. So this banquet is what happened because of the 666. And, I really want to propose that we need the Messiah to come to, put a new mark on his people, to separate the enemies of God, and his followers. We need Jesus to come and separate the sheep and the goats, because right now we're kind of suffering, this judgment, we're kind of suffering, from Trump's deal of the century. And so we really need God to come, to send Jesus to separate us, for God to make a division. Okay, so then it goes on to say, in Esther 1, Queen Vashti also gave a banquet for the women in the palace which belonged to King Ahasuerus. So what I'd like to propose is that Queen Vashti here could be a picture of Obama. And so what we saw is that 120 days after the deal of the century, that was when these quote unquote protesting and looting and rioting started. And so that happened. So that happened on the 120th day. And so, the reason why I say that I think this could be a picture of the looting is that when you think about a banquet being where people, are feasting and I mean, that's what we have kind of, especially with the people that are looting. It's like they are feeding their flesh. They are doing what they want. And so they're really having a party. I mean, banquet would be another word for a party. Um, and then it's interesting because it says the banquet that Queen Vashti came was in the palace which belonged to King Ahasuerus. So you kind of get that concept. You could get that concept here of, you know, um, it's not quite right for Queen Vashti to be giving this banquet in the palace because the palace belongs to King Ahasuerus. Okay, so I'd like to propose that what Obama's people are doing in the streets um, um, is not right because this country belongs to God. Okay. Um, and I mean, if you don't understand how these people connect to Obama, they do. So, like, you kind of had to be aware of kind of what happened the 8 years that Obama was president and how he kind of like united the left around the world under the left's principles. Um, and then we see in Revelation where it talks about um, the people of the prince who is to come. They hate the harlot and they want to destroy the harlot. And so that's what's happening with this looting. And I really think what happened too is that on the 120th day, that was the end of, like, kind of the end of Trump, and that God was allowing Obama to kind of slowly return in power. And so, like, basically that God started the process of Obama coming back. Okay, and so first it's his people in the streets, and then and then it was interesting because today we had Obama making comments about what needs to happen. We had the Pope making comments today too, and so I think we're going to see a return of these people. And then so then it goes on to say, on the seventh day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded these 7 guys, the 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus, to bring Queen Vashti before the king with her royal crown in order to display her beauty to the people and the princes, for she was beautiful. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command delivered by the eunuchs. Okay, so what I want to propose is that the 7th day connects to what we had is that Trump did not send the National Guard to protect the cities. Okay, so what we had was, so I think either on the 6th day or the 7th day, depending on how you count the days. Because if you have like the looting starting at night, then even though we're in the 9th night, the 9th day really doesn't start till tomorrow. And so I think what we had is on the 7th day, I don't remember exactly, I have to chart this out, but we had Trump say that he was going to send the National Guard, and the governors, they didn't want the National Guard. But the thing is because if you have governors that aren't really doing their job, to protect their cities, then the whole reason why the president is given power to, command the National Guard is, to protect the country. Okay, and so when things are falling apart, he needs to take that power and send the National Guard. And I really kind of think I would have preferred that he did that on the second night. When he found out, that this looting and rioting was happening, we needed to basically warn the governors and say, okay, we're going to send the National Guard, whether you want it or not. But Trump cares too much about what people think. And instead of, he cares more about what people think than what is right. Okay. And so then, Okay, so when it talks about Queen Vashti having her royal crown in order to display her beauty is okay. So if Queen Vashti is a picture of America, and so her beauty is um, her military. Okay, um, and then well, and so anyways, but I also said that Queen Vashti is like a picture of Trump. Okay, and so with her royal crown, so that would be the power that Trump has to display her beauty, which would be displaying the military might of America. Um, and so we see in Psalm 78 where it says the sons of Ephraim. Okay, so that would be the northern kingdom. The Jewish people and Israel are the southern kingdom, and the Christians would probably be the northern kingdom. Okay, and that would be Ephraim. So it says the sons of Ephraim were archers equipped with bows, yet they turned back in the day of battle. Okay, is this not the day of battle? I think so, but it's not working. Um, okay. Okay, and then it says the king became very angry and his wrath burned within him. Okay, this is where the king would be God. Okay, so obviously God's going to get mad about what's happening to America. And then it says, then the king said to the wise men who understood the times, and it talks about there being 7 princes who are very aware of what the law says, because then the king says, according to law, what is to be done with Queen Vashti. And so what we have here is like 7 messianic figures who know what the law says. And so 7 being a number that would connect to the Messiah, and they know what the law says. And so it's like God saying to these wise men what should be done with Vashti. Okay. And then when it talks about Vashti, okay, so one of these wise men says, Queen Vashti has wronged not only the king, but also all the princes and all the people who are in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. So if we have Trump being Queen Vashti, it says wrong. Okay, so we have Trump wronged both the Jewish people with this deal of the century, and then now all of God's people in the United States with not protecting the cities during the rioting. Because then it says, okay, because Queen Vashti, it's like 2 groups of people has wronged not only the king. Okay, so the Jewish people and also all the princes. Okay, so I guess actually Queen Vashti has wronged not only the king, that could be a picture of Jesus, and then the princes would be the Jewish people, and all the people who are in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus would be the American Christians. And then it says, for the queen's conduct will become known to all the women, causing them to look with contempt on their husbands by saying, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought into his presence, but she did not come. Okay. So I think we're definitely fulfilling these prophecies. Okay, and so we're definitely in the season of the birth of the Messiah. Okay, and so in Luke we read, while they were there, the days were completed for her to give birth. And she gave birth to her firstborn son, and she wrapped him in cloths and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. Okay, so I was looking at these verses, and so when it talks about her wrapping her firstborn son in cloths, that reminds me of Daniel's 3 friends that were wrapped in cloths in the fiery furnace. And then, so I'm thinking when it says there was no room for them in the inn, it's like there's no room in America for God's people. Like we're being pushed out. Okay. And so I talk about with Daniel's three friends being in the fiery furnace, how they get thrown into the midst of the fiery furnace, and then that's where we want to be, because that's where Jesus ends up showing up. And so there's also this picture of when she, this is Mary lays Jesus in a manger. That's a picture of like the ark too, where, the ark was protection when God's judgment was coming. So I think there could be a lot of prophetic shadows in just this one verse here. Because I even kind of wonder if there's some prophetic shadows about the annexing the West Bank in this story, because it says like there was no room for them in the inn. That could be that could have some prophetic shadows to the annexing the West Bank. And then and then this verse, Luke 2, it says, in the same region there were some shepherds staying out in the fields and keeping watch over their flock by night. And an angel of the Lord suddenly stood before them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were terribly frightened. So that could be a prophetic shadow of Jesus appearing to the rioters, because right now they're staying in the cities. Okay. So that's a possibility. I also mentioned in one of my other videos that it could be a possibility of like a picture of the Jewish people, because like the Jewish people in Israel. The only thing is, I'm not sure why Jesus would be appearing to them. So yeah, I think this might connect more to the rioters. On second thought, as I think about it. And then we read about with the birth of Moses, where they had to hide him for 3 months, and so that would be God's people were hidden for like March, April, and May. So if that's a possible time frame, like we had the shutdown kind of started, well, I talk about like 3/11 in March 11th was when we first found out that we were gonna be shut down. And so 3 months could take us to June 11th. I hope it doesn't go that long, but we'll have to see what happens. And then, but timing is really hard for me to figure out. And then we have the same picture with Moses, where he gets put in like a ark type thing, a wicker basket. Anyways, and so I thought it was interesting because in the book of Daniel we have both the fiery furnace and the lion's den, and so I think that could connect to the two big things here that we're gonna have before the Messiah comes, where right now we have the lion's den, could be a picture of the looting in America. And we find that in Daniel 6, because that happens after 30 days. And so the rioting in America started 30 days after the shutdown had ended. And then the fiery furnace, we see that in Daniel 3. And so that could be a picture of Israel being attacked by their enemies. Because Sodom and Gomorrah is also called like a furnace, like the smoke from Sodom and Gomorrah. They talk about it being like, the Bible talks about it being like the smoke of a furnace. But it's interesting because the two stories are really similar. But I just want to bring that out, because you do kind of, when you read the stories, you're kind of like, well, why do we need both of these stories? And so I think it's probably, the possibility is because there's two different big events that are covered by those stories. Okay, and then we talk about the two Benjamins in Israel, and so We have Darius appointing in Daniel 6, appointing 120 satraps. So that connects to the 120 days, which we find in the Noah and the ark story, where God actually talks about 120 years, but it could also connect to 120 days, which is when the riots started in America. And then it talks about there being three commissioners, of who Daniel was one. And so it's interesting because in Israel we have Benjamin Netanyahu and Benny Gantz, and then if you have the third one, where Daniel would be like a messianic figure, so the third one would be the Messiah. But I also think that same thing is happening in America, where you have like Trump and Obama, and then the third one would be Messiah. And so I think with a lot of the prophetic stuff, it happens in both the countries at the same time. Okay, so then in Genesis 35, so here's some other prophecies that were fulfilling. So we have Rachel began to give birth, and she suffered severe labor. I propose that that's the coronavirus. And then it says, when she was in severe labor, the midwife said to her, "Do not fear, for now you have another son." So do not fear could be a picture of peace and safety. And then it says, now you have another son. We saw in Israel that Israel finally formed a government with two prime ministers. But I also think we could have prophetic shadows in this verse about do not fear, now you have another son. Like, it's interesting because this is connected to the severe labor. That the other son could actually be Obama. I mean, it's interesting because this kind of happened around the same time, so I think it could be showing us both. But basically in severe labor, it's like, okay, God's replacing Trump with Obama. And and so this would be a picture of the rioting, the severe labor. And then it says, it came about as her soul was departing, for she died. And it's interesting that's verse 18, because we see like 666. Okay, and so what I see is the great departure, the falling away. So we see that in America, this great departure, definitely. And then it's like America dying. Okay, and then it says that, so Rachel names, this is Rachel giving birth, by the way. She names him Ben-Oni, this her baby basically that was born. She names him Ben-Oni, the son of my sorrow. And so what we have is that Trump is the son of my sorrow. Okay, the son of Rachel's sorrow. Okay, because basically America right now is a train wreck with the coronavirus and the looting. And so if we see that like America is dying, then that's a picture of Rachel dying, or Rachel dying is a picture of America dying, and that's what we're going through right now. And so we have Trump being the son of my sorrow. But what's interesting is that that's followed by his father calling the baby Benjamin. Okay, so almost like a twin story, even though it really isn't. But it's like we have two babies here. Okay, and the second one being called Benjamin, which means the son of my right hand. Well, that is definitely Messiah. So it's kind of like, as America is dying, then we see the birth of the Messiah. Okay. And then it says Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. And then, so kind of like, basically, like what we're seeing is like the death of America is what is needed to birth the Messiah. And God's kingdom. because really that's what happens. I mean, God's going to bring a division and separate out his people in America. Um, and so it's not going to be the same. And really, America is Babylon. And so, even though I think Babylon also encapsulates all the rest of the nations, but kind of like the headquarters is America, um, for Babylon. And then, um, um, so that's what we're seeing right now is like Babylon dying. And then, of course, we'll see the birthing of the Messiah. Okay, so then in Genesis, okay, let's see. Oh, did I talk about this? Like, we see with the Ben-Oni about Rachel weeping for her children. And then there's a connection too with Esther weeping for her people. Okay. And so I have the verses here with Esther weeping for her people. Um, and so it says, now the king and Haman came to drink wine with Esther the queen, and the king said to Esther on the second day also as they drank their wine at the banquet. So this would be the second banquet of Esther. And, so I'd like to propose that this is the rioting. Okay, so the first banquet was the coronavirus, and then, the feast, which is where people drink wine in the Bible. And it's a picture of God's judgment. Okay, so the second feast of Esther would be a messianic picture, a prophetic shadow of the rioting in America. So this is the second judgment from God in America, the rioting. And so what we have is Esther saying, okay, so as they're drinking their wine at the banquet, which, as we're tasting the wrath of God, basically the judgment of God, as we're suffering the judgment of God, what we have is the king, who would be a picture of God, saying, what is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you, and what is your request? Okay, so what we have is, I think God wants us to call out to him, and, and I think he will answer our prayers. And like, because that connects to those verses, if my people will humbly pray and turn from their wicked ways. So anyways, so what we have is Queen Esther. She says, if I have found favor in your sight, O king, so think of the king as being God, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given as my petition, and my people as my request, for we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. Now, if we had only been sold as slaves, men and women, I would have remained silent, for the trouble would not be commensurate with the annoyance to the king. Okay, so what I wrote is, okay, so she talked about if we were just going to be slaves, like, this is what I'm thinking could be, if people were only protesting, that would be one thing, but there is looting that needs to stop. Okay, that's really like causing havoc for God's people. Because, if they destroy our stores, where are we going to shop, to get groceries, and how will we live, and where will we work? And then it says, the king asked Queen Esther, who is he and where is he who would presume to do thus? Esther says, a foe and an enemy is this wicked Haman. Then Haman became terrified before the king and queen. Okay. So, I think, Haman here could connect to Obama, but it also could connect to Trump too, because, of some of the previous stuff that I said where, Trump partly bears the, the responsibility for the condition that God's people are in this country. Okay, so what did I say? Okay, so I wrote, when she was in severe labor. Oh, so this is where, I wrote this about how the severe labor was a picture of the riots moving from Trump to Obama. And then it says, Trump is the son of my sorrow, the false Messiah. He tries to act like a Messiah. He did that on May 22nd when he opened the churches. And then we also have during the riots him standing in front of the church with a Bible, trying to, look like a Messiah. This was after his speech about using the military. But you have to be aware of the fact with Trump is that don't listen to his words, look at his actions, okay? And so he might say some good things, but what is he actually doing? And then so he was a bad president during the riots. So okay. And so then in Luke 21 we have, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize that her desolation is near. Okay, so I want to propose that the riots in America is, okay, I think Jerusalem is a prophetic shadow of America, because then Zion would be Israel. And okay, so that's what we have right now is armies in America, which, I mean, actually Israel too would be surrounded by armies, especially now that Israel is trying to annex the West Bank. Like, they're getting threats from people around them. So I think this is happening in both countries. They're surrounded by armies in both countries. We have, people in our cities, which is really a type of army. And then in Israel, we have like Jordan is basically threatening war if Israel tries to annex the West Bank. Iran already called for the destruction of Israel. And so then in Matthew 24, so what's interesting is in Matthew 24, we have this verse, which is really similar to this verse in Luke, but this is where it talks about the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place. Okay, so if the holy place is Israel, it says, when you see the abomination of desolation, then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. Okay, that's the exact same phrase that we see in Luke 21:21. Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. So there's a connection. And so what I think, partly is that I think we got the two things happening at once, and that's really what's going on right now, is that we do have the rioting in America happening at the same time that we have Benjamin Netanyahu and Benny Gantz working on annexing the West Bank, okay? And they are really pushing this through. If you haven't been following Israeli news, which you might not be because it's kind of crazy right now, then you might be missing this, but they are really pushing it through. And so I definitely think that's the abomination of desolation, which connects the Trump steal of the century. So, and annexing the West Bank is, comes out of Trump's ideal with the deal of the century. The way they talk about it. Benny Gantz, talks about, wanting to work on Trump's deal of the century. Okay. And I've already talked about how Netanyahu thinks the deal of the century is this great thing. Okay. And so I'm hoping this verse in Matthew 24, pray that your flight will not be in the winter on a Sabbath, for then there be great tribulation, such as not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever will. Unless those days had been cut short, no life would have been saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. Okay, so we weren't really prepared as Christians for tribulation because we were told that we were going to be raptured. And then we were also told too, but for the sake of the elect, we were told that that meant the Jewish people. Okay, well, I think those are wrong. I think, the God's people, the elect would be all of God's people, Jewish and Christians. And that God's people are going to be going through tribulation, okay? And so what has to happen is that God has to cut that great tribulation short to save his people. Okay. And so, I mean, this is the day that we're in right now, because first we have the coronavirus and then we have the riots. If God doesn't cut those short, which, we can't depend on Obama. I mean, well, we can't depend on him, but we can't depend on Trump either. He's not going to save us. We need the Messiah really to come and save us. And so that's why I'm thinking we can be expecting the Messiah any day now, to cut these things short to save us. And then, so I see what this plague of flies could connect to this rioting. And then what we see with the flies is this after the plague of flies. So this is the story of Exodus, the first, Exodus in the book of Exodus. The God sent swarm of flies, and it says like, on you and your servants, on your people, into your houses, and the houses of the Egyptians will be full of swarms of flies, and also the ground on which they dwell. But then we see with this plague that this is the plague that God uses to separate his people. And so then he says, on that day, I will set apart the land of Goshen where my people are living, so that no swarms of flies will be there, in order that you may know that I am the Lord in the midst of the land. Okay? So we need God to come and put his people in a type of Goshen. Okay? And then, because it talks about the land being laid waste because of the swarms of flies. Okay, well, this is some powerful flies, let me tell you, back then, that were, laying the land waste. But we definitely see with the rioters, that's what they're doing, So, okay, so, this verse, okay, so this is in 2 Chronicles 7. What we see is that Solomon observed a feast for 7 days, and all Israel with him, a very great assembly. Okay, so that could be a picture of the riots. Okay, because it talks about a great assembly. Do you not see, the protesters / rioters, just a great assembly. And then, so that connects to the riots. That connects to, okay, Vashti not coming on the 7th day. And then it says on the 8th day they held a solemn assembly, so that could connect to the 8 days of decreasing light of, Trump's Hanukkah. And then it says for the dedication of the altar they observed 7 days, and the feast 7 days. So I'm hoping that this means that the dedication of the altar was the coronavirus, and then the feast for 7 days could be the rioting. I hope that doesn't mean we have to put up with 14 days of rioting. But you know how a lot of times with prophecy we have to wait till it's over to really see how it fits in. But then it goes on to say, on the 23rd day of the 7th month, he sent the people to their tents, rejoicing and happy of heart, because the goodness that the Lord has shown to David and to Solomon and to his people Israel. Okay, so one question I had is the 23rd day, the 9th night. Because what we have is, well, it's hard because I think sometimes the dates and stuff like that are more symbolic. Because I think what we had is, okay, so when we had the coronavirus, I mean, it was like a feast of booths, and that was really like 40 days. And then we had like this type of a day 8 of the feast of booths that happened. And then, well, see, it's interesting because the 8th day of the Feast of Booths is Solomon's assembly. And so kind of like we had the country opening up and then it moved into the riots and looting. I mean, protests. Um, but it was like more than one day. I mean, the 8th day is like one day. And then, so I don't know how long this time frame that we're in right now, being in like the 8th day. And so what we're waiting for is like a 9th day. Okay. And so what we have is the Feast of Booths happens like from the 15th to the 21st. And then the 22nd is the 8th day, the solemn assembly. And then it goes on to the 9th day, this is what we're waiting for, is the 9th day, because that is Simchat Torah's rejoicing in the Torah, which is a picture of the Messiah returning. It is such a picture of the Messiah. And so the 21st day is the last day of the Feast of Booths, and then the 22nd day would be the 8th day, and then the 23rd day would be Simchat Torah. So that's what we're waiting for, is the 23rd day. Okay, so I hope that doesn't happen on the 23rd of June, because that's a really long time to wait. But that's what we're waiting for. I mean, I think we're in day 8, and we're waiting to be in day 9. But what we have is Esther. So Esther talks about 30 days, and then she talks about 3 days, night or day, and then with the Jewish people, and then 3 days, night or day with the maidens. And so what we have is day 120 would be May 26th. Okay, that was also the 30 days too. That was 30 days after this 30 days after the shutdown ended. That's when the riots started. Then we had, so I'm trying to figure this out, like, we see in part, and so I'm gonna show this to you, and then maybe you can figure out what's happening, because I'm a little confused about what's going on. But what we have is, like, May 26th was when the riot started, and then there was like May 27th, and then we had like nothing significant happened on May 27th except the second day of the riots. And then we had like if you consider that the Jews were fasting for Shavuot on the 28th, the 29th, and the 30th, because those were like the 3 days of Shavuot, the evening on the 28th, and then the 2 days. So we have that pattern. Because, I mean, kind of like the Jewish people, they did kind of, if they did talk about the Shavuot like it was more solemn than they're used to because of the coronavirus. And then Esther talks about the maidens fasting in the same way. So what we had was Pentecost is a similar holiday to Shavuot. Okay, so that happened on May 31st. And so then what I think happened is that the 3 days is actually 3 days after Pentecost. I think there might be some kind of patterns like this. So like a day happened and then 3 days, and then June 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. But really, I got to see what happens on June 4th to see if there's any kind of pattern. But what we can consider is that, okay, we're done with that part of the prophecy, okay, because we finished June 3rd. And then what she says after that is, so then after these 3 days, she said, and thus I will go into the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish. Okay. And so that's the next step. Okay. And so I don't know the time frame of that, except that it follows this 3 day pattern. Okay. And then I think what we see when it says, "Thus I will go into the king," is I think you can get sort of two prophetic pictures out of this, because one, it could be a picture of Israel getting attacked, and so Esther could be a picture of their enemies, Israel's enemies, saying, "Okay, I'm going to go attack Israel," which is not according to law, because you should not attack Israel, because you will perish, basically. And so what we have is Israel's enemies saying, "Okay, I'm going to go attack Israel, and then I'll perish," um, because you're going against God. But then it also could be a picture of Esther being a picture of the church, um, going into seeing the Messiah, basically Messiah coming. And so see how we're fulfilling prophecy. Anyways, so hang in there. I mean, we are so close. I mean, really close. I don't know how it's going to play out. But I just look at all these verses, and it's like, wow, the next step is the Messiah coming. So that's just how close we are. And so, just like I pointed out, we have the sea of Obama on one side, the sea of Trump on the other. And we have, with the sea of Trump, we have, like we already saw before the Black Lives Matter riots or protests, we already had like people on the right that were kind of believing like some of Trump's conspiracy theories and other conspiracy theories on the right, that like people were using the coronavirus to try to steal our freedoms and stuff like that. I mean, it is true that people were trying to take advantage of the weaknesses of the coronavirus. I mean, we do see in scripture there's Israel's enemies, that was stuff that they did. And so that happens, that obviously God's enemies are going to take advantage of things like that. But the truth was, I mean, so with the truth in the middle with Messiah, is that the truth really is that coronavirus was judgment from God. And so it just got scary because people on the right were starting to protest and not wear masks, because they were starting to believe these conspiracy theories. Like some people even believe that the coronavirus like completely made up and didn't exist. So don't fall into those conspiracy theories. And then with the people on the left, with these rioters, like if you don't understand how like Black Lives Matter, it is a conspiracy theory, because all lives matter. And if you say that to someone, they get mad. Someone on the left, they think they'll say you're like, what do you call it? That you're prejudiced, or you're racist or whatever. But the truth of the matter is that God says all lives matter. And so there's just a lot of conspiracy theories on the left that kind of drive these riots, and looting and protests and stuff like that. And it's just ugly. It's like it's a crazy time right now in the world. And God said, okay, so there's two things that you need to understand that's going on. Is one, God says, if you divide Israel, I'll divide your land. Okay, so right now he's dividing our land. Okay, we're suffering the consequences of the deal of the century. Okay, and so we're seeing this division take place. Now it's partly preparing, it's partly just last day stuff where, we're going to see the terrors grow up. Okay. and and we're going to see this strong division between God's people and God's enemies. So that's happening. But then also God talks about the deluding influence that he's going to put on his enemies in the last days. And that is what's happening right now. Okay. And it's just insanity in the world right now. So we see this deluding influence. And because basically when you hear people, when like the regular news in America, when they talk about the protests and stuff like that, they keep wanting to emphasize peaceful protests, okay? And they're not even really reporting on the damage that's happening because they want to keep this false image of these protests being peaceful, okay? Because that fits in with their worldview, okay? Rioters don't fit in with their worldview, okay? And looting and stuff like that. So anyways, but like I said, we won't really know the truth until Jesus comes about what's going on, because we're just like, everything's just so skewed right now in the world. And I mean, I do think it's possible that there's people funding maybe some of these rioters. It's highly possible. I don't really know. So anyways, but we just got to remember God has a plan, and he's he hasn't forgotten us, but definitely pray, definitely, you know um be like Esther, praying for her people. um but definitely, I hope that you see from these verses that we could look up, for our redemption draws nigh, the Messiah is at the door. He's gonna show up like almost any day now. um because really that's the next step in all these prophecies. So in timing, I don't know, but just it's got to be really soon. Because everything that's happening in Israel right now, is just falling into place. So hang in there. I know times are tough, but God sees you. God knows you. Um, God has a plan for you, and it's going to be great when Messiah shows up. So, actually, it'd be good to read the verses about Rachel weeping for her children, because then it goes on and talks about how, God has some promises after that. Um, you know, and God talks about he's going to make up for the years that the locusts have eaten. So we've had a lot of locusts just within the last 3 months, and God's going to make up for that. So hang in there. I know it's rough. It's a crazy time right now. So definitely, maybe, read some good Psalms, because it's just a good way to kind of lament to God and pray to God. And, just don't, maybe don't watch too much news, because it's really hard to, God says, think what is true, which is kind of hard right now because we're not getting truth. So that's why we need to really be in God's word, just for our mental health state. And like I said in my last video too, wear a mask, just, be careful with this coronavirus, until God, you know, sends the Messiah and separates us. We need to have a healthy fear of the coronavirus. So hang in there. I really appreciate you listening. I pray for God's blessing and grace on you during this time, and we will catch you later. So hang in there, because we're waiting for the 8 nights of increasing light, which is what we really need. So thanks for tuning in. God bless.